Welcome to the Bloody Broads Pod. We're your Bloody Broads. I'm Bhavna Sharma.
And I'm Jamie Howard. We are your horror guides from page to screen and everything in between. And this week, I'm so excited because we have one of my very best friends, Mr. Ryan Kinney of Brother Ghoulish, out from his tomb to talk about Tales from the Hood, one of our favorite movies. Ryan, why don't you introduce yourself?
Well, first of all, thank y'all for having me on. Y'all know I'm a huge fan of the pod, and I'm always chopping it up with you guys off pod. So I'm really happy to be here. For everyone listening, like they said, Ryan Kinney, Brother Ghoulish. You can find me doing things around horror on many different platforms, whether it's on my podcast, Brother Ghoulish's Tomb, which I started about a year and a half ago, or my limited series that I launched recently, which is Brother Ghoulish's Dragula Breakdown, where I talk about the Boulay brothers' Dragula. So I just love talking horror.
And I love listening to your episode recaps of Dragula. And you just had some pretty amazing guests on. Of course, when this comes out, that'll be about a month and a half ago. But I don't want to spoil anything. I want people to go listen to it because it's so good, you guys.
It is, and please check out his TikTok. It is the best horror TikTok I've ever seen.
Oh my God.
So relatable.
Ryan's horror TikTok kills me. I have to explain it to like my friend that doesn't really watch horror. And I'm like, never mind, you're not going to get this joke. But it's so good. Ryan is the blueprint for horror TikToks, I feel like. And just so good. Obviously, of course. Obviously, this is episode 2 of our Black History Month episodes. And we chose Tales from the Hood because, I mean, even from my perspective, this feels like a very important piece of horror, both written and directed by a Black man. It was written by 2 Black men, directed by a Black man. And Ryan, why don't you kind of give us your, history with Tales from the Hood, why you love it so much, and your first thoughts.
Well, I've been in love with this since I was a kid because I was fortunate enough to see it like relatively close to when it first came out. And it was just one of those movies that my family loved as well. I came from a horror household where my father was really into Blackula. My mom was really into, I don't know, her stuff is just random, like an embrace of a vampire. I don't even know if y'all know about that.
Yes.
And then,
Yes.
and then, my older brother got me into things like Halloween, for example.
Yeah.
So Tales from the Hood was just one of those films that was just a part of those watches that we loved. And at the time, I didn't understand the impacts. I was a kid. I was just very frightened. A lot of those like scenes stayed with me even before I started rewatching it when I got older because I don't know, like something about Tales from the Hood's impact eluded me until I started doing Brother Ghoulish. And of course, Horror Noir came out and everyone was talking about like all these films and many of them I'd grown up seeing, but I never put them into perspective. Like this movie is such a moment. And a lot of the themes that are talked about are still relevant today. It just aged so well.
Oh, that is putting it lightly, aging well.
Yeah.
Bhavna, why don't you give us your first thoughts?
Well, I also watched it pretty close to its release when I was a kid. Actually renting it from Blockbuster for a sleepover, and it was just like our we're watching like an adult movie, but we're children. Right. And for you listeners that have listened for a while, I'm from Scarborough, and what up, Scarborough? And so a lot of us could relate to a lot of this content. But because it was a movie that we rented and it was like, it was lost to the ages for me for a while. So it's not that I didn't remember it. It was more like I only remembered bits and pieces. And then and the sad thing is this movie hasn't really been available unless you search for it for years, decades, let's just say. Even trying to find it for a rewatch for me, for the pod was really hard. I found a way, may or may not have been legal. But I just thought it was interesting for me to revisit it because I hadn't seen it since I was a kid. So there were a lot of references that I didn't know on my first viewing or even my second viewing that I didn't know, or I kind of knew on a very surface level. Because like on a very surface level, I understood the outer reveal. I understood like a bunch of the other stuff. Like, but a lot of the really obvious, not obvious references, which we will all dive into. We have amazing notes here. Mostly these two, I will say. I'm just here for the odd laugh.
Please. Bhavna acts like she's not low-key a genius, you guys, and it cracks me up.
But watching it, like, but having that like extreme distance in between viewings, like it was almost like watching it for the first time. And I just can't wait to dive into this because there's just so much to talk about. I don't even know how we're going to fit this into like a singular episode.
Oh, this is going to be a long episode, and I'm okay with that. Like, this warrants deep discussion.
Yes.
I mean, kind of similar to you, Bob. Like, so when I saw this as a kid, it was heavily edited. But I actually didn't watch this fully all the way through until right after college. And that's because of the way it was marketed. And I'm so frustrated with the marketing on this because the way I vividly remember it being marketed is like almost a spoof or like funny. And if you search this movie, even on, your smart TV, if you have one, and you're trying to rent this, the little subtitle that comes up for the category of film is comedy. And I'm like, ain't shit funny about this to me, other than, some of the deaths are pretty good. And I think that obviously goes back to the time in which it was made. So it came out in 1995, which when I went back and thought about it, that's only 3 years after the Rodney King death. Yeah. Like holy shit. Like this is so connected to the time frame when Get Out came out that it blows my mind. I'm clearly at a lack of intelligent words on that parallel.
I feel like that was cogent. Like I agree, and it puts it into perspective.
Yeah, because again, it was only 3 years after Rodney King getting beaten, and Bhavna and I talk about this a lot, that things don't have to be subtle to be good, and sometimes being subtle with racist doesn't work because they think that they're in on the joke when they're not. And, the criticism is, and we're only going to talk about the 1995 film, but there is 3 total. And I've seen the other 2, and the other 2 really get dogged down by critics for being heavy-handed, whereas this one was pretty masterful in its storytelling, in my opinion. But again, I think that speaks to kind of the society and the time the other 2 came out in, coming out in 2018 and 2020, when maybe we couldn't be as, I guess, allegorical. Things weren't as kumbaya then.
And just another historical context of the times, it was around the time of the Nicole Brown Simpson murder.
Oh God, yeah. Oh my God.
And the O.J. Simpson trial was around the time that this was being cooked up.
What a heavy time in American history. Not that there's ever been like a super light, fun time. But so we do get an incredible performance by Clarence Williams III in this, and he just recently passed. And oh my God, that man deserves every award. It really frustrates me that he wasn't celebrated more in his lifetime. He won Indie Awards and horror-specific awards, yes, and recognition within the community. But my God, does he put on an acting masterclass in this movie? He was also in Half-Baked, which is one of my favorite stoner movies.
And also, every time he said the shit, I lost my shit.
I know. Every time he was like, yes, single time. The shit. Because you know what he said it like?
Oh, yes, the shit.
He said it like the guy from Fairly Odd Parents said Dinkelberg. Like, that's how he said it.
There's your drinking game, guys, for Tales from the Hood. Every time anybody says the shit, take a drink. You'll be drunk in the first, 15 minutes.
I'd totally be down to do that. If we do a rewatch of this, just tell, send me the Clubhouse link.
I was gonna say, do a Clubhouse around the time this episode comes out. We'll have to organize a Clubhouse rewatch. Which, speaking of, yeah. So Rusty Cundiff, one of the co-writers and the director, actually did a Clubhouse watch with our group of friends, organized by the girls from Girl That's Scary. Shout out Kat and Jazz. That rewatch was amazing. To have Rusty commentating on this live, I was like, I'm not worthy to be in this presence. Like, he had some of the best, like, kind of behind the scenes commentary on this. And I definitely want to get into that, especially as we go through the stories. Before we get into serious stuff, I told this to his to his avatar on Clubhouse. I need a Sims funeral home sweatshirt or piece of merch yesterday. I'll take a koozie at this point or a sticker. I just need it. I just need it.
I do too. I feel like there's in my like soul like a pantheon of like black horror icons, and Clarence Williams III as Mr. Sims is up there
Absolutely.
because it's immediately recognizable, one of a kind, and there's something about the performance that, although it is very like frightening, it is kind of like there is a bit of humor to it as well because we're all in on the joke that he's on our rewatches, but the souls that are going through Sims is totally not. And so it's a little funny. It puts it into perspective on rewatches. And if they make merch for this, I think it would do really well because this is becoming, in my opinion, sort of like, and I hate to say it like this because based on the marketing, like you talked about, it's basically becoming like a cult classic. It's starting to
Yeah.
get its flowers now. More people are starting to become aware of it. More people are talking about this film. And that's usually a great place for merch to sell.
Yeah.
Right?
Like I could totally see like Super Yaki or somebody putting out, a Sims Funeral House line or something.
Please. And Rusty, if you're listening to this, call me, beat me if you want to reach me. Like, we will happily buy merch from you. I hope you get the money on the merch. Yeah. The setup for this movie is, the trio of young gang members, young men, who come to Sim's funeral home to pick up, as Bhavna said, their shit. It's very clearly drugs that are being stashed at a funeral home, which, like, super on brand for me. I'm not going to lie.
Also, just on that topic though, the amount of 90s slang was such amazing nostalgia for me. I was just like, it was a hit of serotonin because I'm like, oh, my childhood.
I know. So my brother is 6 years older than me. So it's so funny. I have memories, even though I was, so young in the 90s. Like, I have vivid memories of him, honestly, speaking and dressing not too different from these guys. I was like, oh, it's so comforting, even though it's kind of a fucked up situation.
Y'all are so accurate. Like a few of my cousins are definitely like carbon copies of the caricature that was going into this funeral home. And then also the actors that are portraying them are all 90s feels because you just remember all the movies and TV shows they were in. Like, I had even taken a note of, I know y'all probably saw it, that the dude that played Junior in Players Club, who's in this too, I just do not trust him in anything he's in.
Ever.
Every role he plays in is just janky like this. Because he was also in Menace to Society, if you remember. He's always like scheming on somebody, and it's just all the feels.
He's
also that Kanga hat.
Yeah, he belongs on an episode of Scam Goddess, another good podcast that we love. Shout out Lacey Mosley. So they go in and they just want their drugs, right? But Clarence Williams, the third character, Mr. Sims, is just like, first, let me show you these bodies, which for gang members, it's so funny in that aspect because they're so nonchalant about it. They're like, yeah, these bodies. And the first one we see is fairly like, you don't really see anything too grotesque in the first one in terms of seeing the body in the casket. And it gets kind of worse as we go on. But the first, body we see opens up at the first story, and that's called Road Cop Revelation. And, sadly, this is incredibly still relevant. I guess not much has changed, you guys.
No, not particularly. It was almost just like, was this made in 1995, 2005, 2015, 2025?
Woof.
Yeah.
Ryan, initial thoughts on this first section of the anthology?
I was really impressed with it. And like I told you, like, I rewatched it I think around the same time you all did in that clubhouse room with Rusty. I think that's the last time I watched it. But watching it with like this critical eye so that we can talk about it, I immediately noticed ley lines between this and topics that were discussed in the book Darkly by Leila Taylor. Which I actually have sitting next to me because I was going to read like something from it later. But the thing about it is, as I was flipping through this to talk about this first story, it turns out that when Leila Taylor, and for everyone listening, I actually really suggest this book. Leila is spelled Leila. Taylor is spelled Taylor. It's darkly Black history in America's Gothic soul. And it talks about the relationship of Black people and what we view as like Gothic culture or subculture. And obviously, there's a lot of hard discussing it because of it. And when they talk about Tales from the Hood in this particular story, we see the importance of commemorating our Black legends in art and how that shows up as street graffiti and why it does, for example. And we see how there's like this nice juxtaposition in this story where the cops are actively trying to desecrate that same thing. So the story does a great job talking on a lot. It hits on, I mean, and it's short. Like, this isn't a long piece for it to go through all of these things.
Holy shit. Yeah, no. So the main character in this story is a, city council member. His last name is Morehouse, obviously a nod to the famous HBCU. And he is actively trying to fight against these, corrupt cops that are themselves selling drugs, which was actually happening and still happens as far as I know today, is police officers planting drugs in communities that are mostly people of color, especially Black people. So they plant drugs on his car after he speaks out about it. They make it look like an overdose, and they drive his car in the water. So when the police, what is it, 5 years later, you guys, that they jump to after that? I think
So.
Something
yeah.
like that,
Yeah, they jump forward, and it's 5 years later after they've, framed his murder as a suicide by drugs. The police officers literally piss on his grave. Let me tell y'all, I would have been an animal. I would have been throwing hands. I would have been fighting somebody. And that's very easy for me to say as a petite white woman. But I guess one of the thing that kind of spurs it on is that it's the ex police officer that is also a Black man that kind of meets them at the cemetery, so to speak, on the 5th anniversary of his death. And we get the whole scene of, the white police officers literally peeing on the grave of, desecrating the grave of a Black man in America. And I think that just speaks to kind of the watering down of civil rights icons' legacies, like how MLK has just been watered down to this, like, let me post a quote on his birthday that we all get the day off for. And now there's like fucking furniture sales for his birthday, which is a whole other discussion, but it disgusts me. I have a lot of feelings on this.
Same.
Another thing, like kind of similar in that vein, not similar, but it's another thing to touch upon was the use of the song Strange Fruit, sung by Billie Holiday, which obviously as a kid I did not understand. But as on this like second or whatever rewatching this is on now, because I'm old and I can't remember my times anymore. Immediately, like I was like, holy shit, this is not like we've used the term heavy-handed before, and I'm like, this is definitely a great use of it being heavy-handed. I'm like, oh yeah, you are not pulling any punches with this. Like, this was like, oh yep, as if like the whole scenario wasn't subtle, like wasn't like not subtle enough. Like, this was just like an extra, like, if you know, and like you should know. And like your notes, Ryan, like for people that don't know the story of it, they should definitely look it up. Strange Fruit, sung by Billie Holiday, not written by her, is an important caveat there.
I'm happy you brought that up because, and I'm going to be touching on Darkly a lot. It's
good. No, it's a great book. Yeah.
Do.
Okay. I'm about to say, I feel like it's a great follow-up read to watching Tales from the Hood. Like, there's so many topics that are discussed. Like, they even talk about Billie Holiday covering this song and how effective it was coming from her versus the other people who touched on it before or after, and how intrinsically connected it is to the Black experience. I just really like that, once again, that this is so short, but it got into all that. And I even wanted to like read the passage where they were talking about graffiti. I'm scrolling down to it now. So it's actually, if y'all have the book and you just want to like flip it and see it one day, it's on page 114 and 15. So it's like at the bottom. And it says, and this is about graffiti art, obviously. So these tributes become part of the urban landscape. And as a result, the traces of the dead become part of the historical texture of the neighborhood. Black neighborhoods from cities all over the country are painted with portraits of loved ones, as well as fallen heroes like Malcolm X and Tupac Shakur. a memento mori in spray paint and brick. And it's really because, like, when you think about it, so many of our legends who have been killed by, white men, or whose legacy have been, like you talked about earlier, Jamie, just watered down because of who's writing the history books. Black people feel like we want to have a need to put out our legends and to commemorate them. And it shows up like this sometimes. Like, think about that iconic Biggie painting. Like, I think it was like
Oh,
3 or 4 years ago,
yes. Yeah.
when after all this gentrification was going on, a lot of people were trying to get it removed. And the community spoke up and was like, because I think there's that disconnect. So many people look at graffiti or street art as something that's like a blight on their, on their neighborhood. Whereas for us, it means something completely different. And this story touches on that because the spirit is actually coming out of graffiti art that has been done to commemorate him. And to touch on something that you said earlier, Jamie, like, it was kind of cool that it is such a nod to Morehouse. And there's this, his name is Martin Morehouse,
Yeah.
and how, Martin Luther King Jr. went to Morehouse as an early admit at the age of 15, and his father and grandfather went there. So it's a clear nod to like our community or civil rights leaders and how they've impacted the community. And he's like a representation of so many people who've gone through that. So I thought that was a nice nod too.
Yeah. I'm so lucky to live in Atlanta where like I can just go see these super historic sites and it's really easy to take it for granted. I feel the same way about like the National African American History Museum in DC. I've been twice now and it wrecks me every time, but they do a whole section on, and I'll talk about this in our next section, actually. I don't want to jump too far ahead, but they have a whole section on Emmett Till. And I definitely want to get into that because that's in this movie. And I think the third one, yeah, it's in this movie and nods to, well, not nods, it's blatant in the third Tales from the Hood. But yeah, the way that, Officer Newton ends up dying is the zombie of Martin Morehouse basically controlling these hypodermic needles that are like tossed out in an alley, which again, drugs, shooting his body up and then nailing him to this, cross on the mural. And the layers to this film are absurd. And the fact that again, this goes back to what I was saying, the fact that it got marketed as like a comedy or a spoof. Yes, there are lighthearted moments in it, but at the time it made it hard for me to appreciate what it was because again, I didn't know what to expect going into it because I was marketed a comedy. And also I think something that gets touched upon in this short is the idea of cops that are also Black, especially in America. And Ryan, I know you had thoughts about this, and it's the idea of good people get recruited to be in the armed forces or on first responders, and they want to change things from the inside out, and they really do have good intentions. But I think in the end, the system is just so broken right now that, it's kind of a moot point, not to be bleak, but.
Yeah. I mean, I'm with you. Like, and it's funny because, like you said, I believe that everyone that goes into the situation, they have good intentions. And then the politics are just so convoluted. Even like with this character, he wanted to, I guess, affect change when it was happening, like the beatdown, but then he did the wrong thing by not reporting it. And automatically I was like Googling the MLK quote that they use every year, unfortunately, but I felt like it fit here. In the end, we remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. And it's like you're helping feed systemic racism when you're not speaking up and you're not affecting change at your own level, because then that's helping the system thrive. Whereas if he came out and said something, I mean, we don't know what would have happened. Maybe he wouldn't have been believed. Maybe his life still would have been in danger. But he kind of died either way because the life he was living after was just so messed up. Like, he was like drinking himself silly. He, I think, wasn't even on the force anymore. And
No, he was doesn't he wind up in a asylum, like a
yeah,
mental health facility?
yeah.
I mean, this is such a heavy start that I'm glad that when we snap out of it and we see that, ultimately he does die, that we snap back out of it and we do have Clarence being Mr. Sims and we do get that comedic relief, because I think if we didn't have the comedic relief in between these.
Yeah.
Ooh. I mean, there are even parts in it that are dark humor, just for me, to be honest. Like,
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
even though it's really sad, that they were desecrating the grave and everything. Growing up, my cousins were just very out of control. So sometimes they would mimic like the mocking things and just how
Mm-hmm.
heavily leaning in these people were. And I hear that in my head sometimes. So I'm just like, I'm laughing because it's like so ridiculous. Like, you guys are so terrible. It's like, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna piss on his grave. And I'm like, no, sir, no. But I'm like, this is so bad. Especially because we're rewatching it. The humor in it is that we know that they're gonna get their comeuppance, like as bad as
Right.
it is. So, and I like that about these stories. It's like there's this dark element because obviously black bodies are being dispatched, so that's a serious topic. But we see vengeance,
Yeah.
He's like, motherfucker, you think I'm dead? And he comes up out the ground and he's like a zombie. And oh, he looks so good.
First of all, I didn't know they shot that in a real cemetery until recently. And I just pictured them trying to set up these like air cannons that they use to like cause that special effect of the grave exploding in an actual
Yeah.
cemetery. Someone's Mima was bent about that. So we go from kind of something heavier on like a societal scale to something a little more personal after that. And we get to Boys Do Get Bruised, which is such a tough one to watch. If
There's a lot of layers to this one as well.
Jesus, the little boy that plays little Walter is so cute.
Oh,
He's
yes.
adorable. And obviously the teacher is Richard Garvey, which is played by Rusty Cundiff, which I told Bhavna before we started recording. 19-year-old me was like, whomst is this? Like, he's a good looking man.
Also, his style. I wanted those sunglasses. Like, I still want those sunglasses.
Right? I was like, oh, you look good.
Yeah, for sure. Even the hair, everything. Like, he was a
Mhm.
handsome man, very handsome.
So it's, we get the setup of this little boy who is clearly getting bullied at school, and we later learn is getting abused at home, but he keeps calling it his monster. And then he talks to his teacher, Mr. Garvey, again, played by director Rusty Cundiff. And I don't know about y'all, but I would be so excited to be able to voodoo my bullies in elementary school.
Fucking
Yeah.
same.
Can you just imagine, like,
Oh, no, go ahead.
no. I was gonna say, can you just imagine like playing hangman with your crayons, and then all of a sudden your childhood bully like folding like a house of cards?
Oh, no.
No, man.
I mean,
No, it's not to overuse this quote. With great power comes great responsibility, and I would not be responsible.
Same.
I wouldn't either. I was just about to say, God knew not to give me them powers because it probably would have been a massacre. Like, well, not even probably. Like,
It
if
would be.
someone cut me off on the freeway or something, I'd say, "Oh, bitch, I got you," and I'd pull over, crumple, crumple, and next thing you know, a clear freeway.
Ryan's
Hold on,
out
let me
here.
pull up a real quick sketch real fast.
Yeah, Ryan's out here Thanos snapping people for not using their blinker.
Oh, hell yeah.
It's like, I'm sorry, you just held up the Starbucks line and I missed my bus. Give me one moment.
Right.
So every time the little boy draws, a picture of whoever he wants to hurt, he crumples the paper and it breaks them, like physically breaks them down. This is the best use of body horror, in my opinion, of all time. There are other movies that do it well, but to watch that little boy fold up and then one of the other teachers say, he's got weak bones. All I could think of was he needs some milk.
Oh, accurate.
But like the power of this kid's imagination, though, when he actually does draw the quote unquote monster, it looks like a whole ass Guillermo del Toro bunny. Like, I could see this as like, his next movie, like zombie nuclear-esque looking like zombie bunny, like Rambo the bunny. I don't know how to describe it, but just essentially like if Guillermo del Toro came up with a monster bunny, that's who this kid's monster looks like.
It's Guillermo del Toro doing Donnie Darko. That's exactly what it is.
Do you think this is where they got their Donnie Darko inspiration from?
I don't know. We got to ask GDT. But yeah, and I think it was very important, like Ryan, I know you've mentioned in the past, to show that the abuse of a little boy specifically, and a little black boy specifically. I know you had a lot of thoughts about that, which I loved.
Yeah, the reality is, I think like society does a bang up job of telling boys like, "Oh, toughen up, be a man about it." Like, boys don't cry. And so when we think about abuse, sometimes like little boys who are being abused, oftentimes, especially in the Black community, like I feel like there's a piece that we can do to just look out for our youth a lot, our young boys, check in with them, make sure they're okay. And I'm fortunate to say that like a lot of the people who are millennials who are having kids, this is dialogue that is happening. And I know, Jamie, you listen to the Read, for example, like I do,
Yes.
and they're constantly talking about this dynamic of, remember, boys need to be protected too. And to see like this protagonist who's like a young Black boy at the helm of the story, I mean, around this time, People Under the Stairs was out too, where they had done something similar. But aside from these two bodies of horror, I can't think of that being the case in many instances. So, that was also nice to see.
Yeah, like this stuff didn't really come up in media until like later, like the early aughts to mid aughts, with like police procedurals, unfortunately, where like these kinds of stories with this kind of message started coming up in there, with a nice little heavy dash of white savior complex.
Always.
And like praise the cops. For those that listen, you guys probably figured out by now that SVU is one of my favorite shows, but obviously has a million problems with it.
Especially heinous.
It definitely has, especially heinous. Like even when they're quote unquote trying, it's still like, it's the best out there, but they could do a lot better. But in terms of storylines like this, where like you have young men of color, young Black men, young Black boys being abused, and like in any kind of sense, verbally, emotionally, physically, sexually, it doesn't matter, just any kind of abuse, like that kind of stuff doesn't even come up in popular media with a sympathetic and empathetic eye and a critical eye until like at least 10 years after this movie.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's nothing, there's no movies, there's no television, maybe an episode of something forgotten somewhere, like, but in terms of like mass media and things like that, like, or with the reach that this movie had at its time, you don't have anything, which is really just a very sad take on society.
Oh yeah.
That part.
And I think too, like, again, obviously, like there's the iconic horror line, not from this film, but the call is coming from inside the house. The monster is coming from inside the house.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And it's a parallel that is true to life. When we think about like domestic abuse, or when it gets darker, unfortunately, like people even being murdered, typically it's someone that it's someone very close to you. And the reality is like this does a good job on touching on it. And I know it seems random. Y'all probably, when y'all saw the notes, like, oh, only Ryan, what the hell? Scooby-Doo. This idea that like the real monster.
That was amazing.
People. Okay.
I thought too, I was like, oh my God, it's just like that meme where he like pulls the mask off and it's himself.
And I would have gotten away with it if it wasn't for you meddling teacher.
And I would have gotten away with it too if you weren't for you meddling kids. I still love some Scooby-Doo.
Like, so too. Listen, the Scooby-Doo movies with like the like live action ones from the early aughts, Jesus, I love all those. And not just because they have Matthew Lillard in them, although that does help.
It helps, yeah.
I was gonna say,
y'all make fun of me all you want. I still have a crush on that man.
Shoot, no judgment over here. I get
zero.
No judgment.
Yeah, no. Which after this comes out, we'll have seen Scream 5, and I'm so excited.
I mean, and for all you Matthew Lillard fans, check out Good Girls. I know it's done.
Yes, but
please, he's great.
I know. I love that show. So I think that this movie kind of also suffered, specifically in this story, from being labeled a comedy instead of just pure like horror comedy or even just horror, which horror comedy to me, again, is more along the lines of like freaky.
Yeah.
Ryan and I just had a brain sync moment because it's so good. I love freaky. People, laugh when they're uncomfortable. And I think that this movie is a good example of that.
Yeah. And if you're not feeling uncomfortable with this especially this segment, then please go check out your local mental health facility, talk to somebody, talk to a friend.
Yeah, I'll give me social life. Yes. Like, but the funny thing is, and this is me just like sharing more so for the listeners, because I know that you both already knew about this, especially Jamie, because Rusty talked about it in the room.
Yeah.
But the original scene where Paula Jai Parker is getting beat by David Alan Grier's character initially was much longer. And when they did like a test screening, everyone was laughing at the beginning of it, and as it went on, it just went dead silent. And he actually came at it from an empathetic place by saying, I don't think people were laughing because they actually found it funny. I think that it was uncomfortable for them because it may be something they witnessed at home, or and we deflect by laughing and just like making a joke of something so we can cope with things. But a
Yeah.
lot of that goes out the window as the scene goes on, and the reality sinks in that this is happening for people. It has like that impact.
Even in like the final cut of that scene, like the release of that scene, like even the first couple of hits that he lands are very theatrical, are
Yeah.
very exaggerated, are very like no one. I mean,
You
not
would
that
pray
I
not,
have
right?
personal experience. Like nobody starts off beating somebody with like
An
you know
uppercut.
an uppercut. Like this is not a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie. This is not like
I can't. I can't.
like I'm not like criticizing how
We
DV
know,
works,
yeah.
but
His
it's
first
more
punch
so
is very like it's a
it's
stage punch. Yeah.
it is a stage punch, and like the sound and everything, and then like the little cut away so you don't actually see the violence and stuff like that, or you don't actually see it not connecting, etc., etc. It does come off as like comedic only in that it is a very theatrical punch, and then like but towards the end you do get like the what you kind of expect out of a scene like that, which is not cool,
Yeah.
not nice, not fun to watch.
No, and it was so tough to watch David Allen Greer in this because I grew up way too young watching In Living Color, which is one of my favorite TV shows of all time.
That's my shit.
That is,
Mhm.
listen, homie D clown. Listen, but seeing David Allen Greer in this, I was like, oh shit. Because again, I didn't see this until I was about 19. I think it was like freshman year of college. And oh my God. First of all, that man is such a great actor, but to see a comedic actor in a horrific role, I had a hard time like after that movie watching some episodes of In Living Color because I was like, oh my God, beat her ass.
I feel like I don't remember where I heard this growing up, but like horror and comedy come from the same place. And so there's something effective about this guy is so funny. Like he's so funny. And like when I saw it like as a kid, it had the same impact. Like I had seen him in so many things where I'd laughed at him that that made it even more frightening to see him
Yes.
behave like that in this film. It almost felt like what was he hiding? And the funny thing is like I think that there are other cases like in more modern horror where we're starting to see this because Jordan Peele, for example, is doing a great job. He's killing it with Us and Get Out, and hopefully Nope is probably going to have elements of this as well. But when you
I'm so
flip back
excited.
to his catalog, like he's a really funny guy who's been interested in horror. Like one day on the Tomb, I don't know how I'm going to do it. I'm actually going to go through and talk about his horror-based skits in Key and Peele. There's a lot
Yes.
of nods or indicators that like that weird like mix between horror and comedy and how they really come from the same place.
Well, Ryan, you and I have talked about this, like just in texts and voice notes or
Yeah.
whatever. Because y'all, Ryan and I voice note like we're getting paid to do it because it's easier than texting. Because we both have like a like crazy schedule. Anyways, there are so many moments in Key and Peele that utilize body horror or existential horror, even in like the babe sketch, like the Megan, like they go to outer space and he's crawling until he's a skeleton. Like, of course, that's horrific. Like, and then there's a sketch where there are nurses on the show, The Doctors, and the nurse like accidentally cuts off somebody's leg. And I just remember being like, why is this on a comedy sketch show? But I say all that to say, again, Tales from the Hood was marketed as a comedy, and I think marketing could have done a better job. But at the same time, there has to be that layer of comedic efforts and horrific efforts coming from the same place because it's both a fantasy of what modern life actually is. And it's a way of coping with it. Like I know people that are super into horror and I know people that are super into comedy, and very few are both.
Yeah, and like speaking on Key and Peele for just a moment, on Key, on Keegan Michael Key, I didn't know he was in this when I booked tickets because I will be straight up, I booked tickets just for Oscar Isaac. But I saw him in Hamlet, playing Horatio opposite
so
Oscar
good.
Isaac. Oh God, he was so good. He was so good in it. Like, and I wasn't expecting it. As soon as I saw him, I was just like, excuse me? I mean, Horatio was hilarious, but unintentionally hilarious. But like just to see somebody who I'd seen in so many sketch and like in a sketch comedy environment play like this role, and he killed it, guys. I will tell you, he killed it. Like, I mean, he has probably a second act as a Shakespearean actor, this man. 100%. Also, side note, Tessa Thompson told me she liked my lipstick in the bathroom of that.
Stop. Also,
And Ragnarok hadn't come out yet, and I was just like,
Nice.
also that, and Ryan mentioned this, but David Alan Grier is a traditionally Shakespeare trained actor, so that makes sense. Listen, I will simp for all my fellow Shakespearean trained actors for the rest of my life. That and like our classic Greek theater stuff, like it comes in handy. So we go from this.
I didn't know you were Shakespearean as well. I didn't know that.
Yeah, we'll have to talk off pod. I grew up
Let's
going
go.
to a theater conservatory, and I've played literally like both male and female roles as Shakespeare intended. It's so fun, you guys.
I love that they do that, by the way. But yeah, like you said, I need that tea later. But yeah, I live.
We'll talk about it. We'll talk about it.
also, same. You're talking to the best King Duncan in grade 8.
Yes, Bhavna. Yes, King Bhavna.
Wait, really? Yes. Wait, hold
Oh
on.
yeah,
Yes,
Ryan. We're
I'm
both former theater kids. It's all good.
I am too, but I'm not Shakespearean or anything, but I was a theater kid as well. I didn't know we all shared
Yes.
this. That's actually crazy. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm really surprised though with the way that our chats be going off.
I
mean,
know. Someday someone's gonna like have access to like our texts and DMs and be like, "This is what's wrong with them," in a good way. So we go from Boys Get Bruised to, which I think the title kind of alludes to what Ryan, wanted to talk about, which is the fact that, mental health gets really undercut for men, especially Black men, into my personal favorite part of the anthology called KKK Comeuppance. This story is like the best revenge story I've ever seen since like, I don't even know. There's some classic revenge horror stories, of course, but this one is probably one of my favorites. So this guy's name that's running for governor is Duke Medgar, but I thought it was Duke Metger, which is even more racist. So obviously there's David Duke, which he was at one time the head of the KKK, but I thought his last name was Medgar, as in Medgar Evers, the very famous civil rights activist.
Yeah, that name was pulling no punches.
At all.
They did not pull any. As soon as he said his name was Duke, I was just like, oh, this is what and it's called like KKK. I was like, okay, this is what we're in for. Please go ahead. Also, looking at this man, who the fuck told him that short layers was the way to go?
Oh, his haircut is
2 different colors. Like I first thought it was a hairpiece. I'm like, no, that's not a hairpiece. What the hell is this? Please go to a salon.
His hair is very 1995, and not in a good way.
No, like it's like how tell me you're racist without telling me you're racist.
That part.
That is the racist white man blonde color, like that, you probably got it from like L'Oreal or something. Like That is like 1995 racist man. That's what it's called.
Frank Ocean is helping us reclaim it. So it's one step in the right direction.
Thank you, Frank Ocean.
We love you. That's the Frank Ocean Stand Pod. So he's running for governor, but he lives in a mansion that was formerly owned by a slave master, which is unfortunately like 90% of the historical homes in the South. Side note, this has very little to do with the story. Every time I see someone get married at a plantation that's still called a plantation, I'm like, do y'all realize that that's almost like getting married at like where mass murder happened? Like, I don't understand.
Yeah. Me neither. It's just like, and I'm Canadian, so obviously we didn't get as much of the history taught to us. We did, but we get it from a different lens, and it's not necessarily the best lens, but it's a different lens that we get up here. They have a lot of Canadian like white savior complex up here because they're like, all the slaves escaped up here. We gave them, safe refuge, and I'm like, and y'all are still racist as shit and refuse to see it.
Exactly.
Anyway, but just like just on your point, Jamie, even when it's like, especially when it's like cool couples that get married there, and I'm like, but we know you're not pieces of shit, so why are you doing this? You know this. You have access to Google. You have a phone.
I think that there's still this romanticization. I can't say the word romanticization. Is that the word? Whatever. Okay, thank you. Of that Southern plantation life, and it pops up in weird ways. Because I'd definitely be side eyeing the plantation wedding thing as well. I have to be honest, and I also, if anyone were to try to argue with me, I'm like, no, it is still romanticized because what the hell was that HBO show? What was it called? The Confederate or something that,
Oh, Confederate. Yeah, they did wound up not
yeah,
making it, but they were going to. And I was like, no one needs to see if the South won because we clearly still see effects of them losing today. Like,
right. Like, ugh, choices.
I know. And so we meet him, Duke running for governor, and then we meet his little lackey, which I hate using that word, but that's literally what he is his image consultant, Rhodey, which I was like, Iron Man question mark.
Same.
And he is a light-skinned Black man who is helping this white man rehabilitate his image to be like palpable to people to vote for him. And all I can think of is I'm just like, oh my, like this is literally like the women that worked for Trump, but with race instead of sex. Like, I'm just like, oh my God,
Yeah.
why would you do this?
And it very much reminded me of Sorry to Bother You.
Oh, I love
With-
Sorry to Bother You. Yes.
Oh, I fucking love Sorry to Bother You, even though some people have proven to be extremely problematic
Oh, I know. Oops.
in the aftermath, which makes me really mad. But just the white people voice, like the white person voice, and as someone that also works in a similar environment to Sorry to Bother You, it's like it's a real thing. And so just to see him kind of like, not that you see him interact with other Black people in this, you don't, he's very short-lived in this, short-lived in this segment.
God.
I can't wait. I can't.
You can always count on me for the obvious dad joke here, guys. But whatchamacallit, but you see him pulled on like not necessarily the white voice, but just like construct, like when he actually takes the camera and pretends to be him,
To be Duke. Yeah.
To
And
be
he
Duke.
makes the racist joke.
and he, yeah, exactly, and then he's just like, like that was so funny, and I'm like, cringe.
I wish I could have just made a gif of Ryan's face. He was just shaking his head with his hand on his chin, like, Jesus Christ.
Yeah, but no, seriously though, like when he did that segment, I was just like, I remember watching it as like in my rewatch, just being like, oh no, don't help him. Don't help him.
I literally put in the notes, and this is no surprise to anyone who's been in Clubhouse with me because y'all know I have a category for these, the Candace Owens.
Yes.
And let me explain
Yes.
something to you. It was very strong in that energy. And isn't it interesting? Like the first story has a very similar character, but in a different dynamic of the Black person who is working against their own people. And it's something that is still an issue because I think it's a complicated experience. I can't say that it's the same for each person, but I think a lot of these people don't think so much about like on the plantations, there'd be like quote unquote the house, you know what, who would actually be weaponized against the slaves essentially because they would give them an opportunity and that particular opportunity would excuse me would make them in some cases start feeling like they're better than their own community. And this is something that even goes back before slavery. And like there's a book that I've referenced to people in the past about this, 2000 Seasons by Iyikwe Arma, because there's so much of our history that has been lost because of us being taken from our home, from us not being involved with the history books being written. There's just so much breakdown. But Iyikwe Arma attempts to recover some of that with this piece. And the funny thing is, he talks about even in Africa where things like this would happen, where sometimes people who were attempting to colonize or like take over a space, they would pick a few people and then they would give them like perceived power or like a promotion or bring them into their ranks and essentially use them against their own people. And you see it not just in like these fictional universes, but you kind of see it in real life. And what's sad to say is when you get white validation sometimes in these spaces, it can open up doors to certain people or it can like get them more money. So then they change, they switch up. And this isn't the case for everyone, but you see it with this Candace Owens motherfucker and the one from the first story. Wait, do we curse on this pod?
Yeah, we
Always.
curse.
I have a dirty
Okay.
mouth. It's fine.
Yeah,
I
same.
got it. All right.
So
But to touch on your point there, like that's exactly, and to go on another side tangent, but we're going like a racism side tangent. This is
Racism
kind
side
of like
tangent.
how, and I'm going to try and make this, I'm trying to make my big thought succinct, but
Okay.
how it works with Indian people in the Western sphere as well is that people like Indian people are some of the more racist people on the planet. I can tell you that from experience. Not me. Like I was raised in a lot of things I had to unlearn about a lot of different groups of people, Black people included. But thankfully I grew up in the neighborhood I grew up in. So it was easily like someone told me something, but I saw something different and could immediately like be like, that's not real. But where I'm going with this is that like in the colonizers, let's just call them that, would give more importance to like would treat Indian people less badly than like Black people, and that like that still is a thing in society today. Like they don't ever say it overtly, but we'll get better. We're chosen as the better immigrants because we become the doctors, the lawyers, like we're more desirable to come in, like us and like East Asian people as well. So and then in turn it's like, how do I say it? Then we end up treating our fellow POC, not as well, and look at them in the same light as like the colonizers do. And then there's a lot of I'm talking about a lot of my family here, sorry guys if you're listening. there's been a lot of work that we've had to undo. I mean I could probably have a whole episode on this myself and how angry I am at how my people are, but to point out, to touch on Ryan's point, is like you give them a little bit of power, you give them a little bit of importance, you separate them, you make them the special. In some cases, it's like, yes, we know we're also being oppressed, but we're less oppressed than this class of people, or like this, like, or this, these people over here. And then it's just chaos reigns, right? Then it's just like, then we're just doing their job for them. And so makes me so mad.
Yeah. So this is also, I'm always going to come at it from the psychology degree, y'all. From a psychological from the psychological standpoint, the term is triangularization. So if you're in a narcissistic relationship and they're trying to separate you from your loved ones so they can have you all to their self, it happens in cults as well, where they pit you. They're like, okay, pick me or them. And it's, if you can triangulate someone in their relationship and how they compare to other people, you have the upper hand on them. And I think this story so perfectly illustrates that, because the idea is that this white man has moved into a mansion and there's a painting of, one of the former slaves in it. And she made all these dolls, and Rhodey falls down the stairs while they're filming this video. And at the funeral, he has a guy come up to him and he says, you need to move out of this house or something bad's going to happen to you. And it's a Black man that says that to him. He goes back and is watching the tape. Duke gets back home and starts watching the tape of the day that Rhodey died. And he realizes there's a doll that tripped Rhodey down the stairs. And it's the same doll that appeared in the limo, on the way home from the funeral. That part gave me chills. The first time I saw this, I flipped shit, lost it, because dolls are already creepy. And so Duke gets really defensive. And in the one scene in this that honestly is very funny, he's trying to defend himself against these dolls that are disappearing out of the painting and appearing in real life as the lore is. I just knocked my mic down, you guys. I talk with my hands, and I got really excited about this because, again, this is my favorite part of the whole movie. The doll that first appears out of the painting disappears out of the painting, and it looks like when you would take stickers, like off a sticker page, And he takes this vase, Duke takes this vase, and he's trying to defend himself against this teeny tiny doll, and he yells out, "No reparations." He throws the vase. We're all like dying. My face is so red right now, y'all. It's just him yelling, "No reparations." Like, that's how people still feel, like they don't even want to give like Indigenous people their land back, and they don't want to give, I think, and this is a much bigger discussion than just this one section of this movie, but, applying the idea of generational wealth, we have this image of it being like an Elon Musk, when in reality, it's every white person that's ever been able to afford a house in a traditionally Black neighborhood. And it's so funny. It's just a moment of like, this is how absurd racism is in this movie. And of course, the dolls being stop motion. I don't know how you guys feel about stop motion. Does stop motion not creep y'all out? It creeps me out in a good way. Like,
Yeah.
Same.
And I found the use of the stop motion with the dolls was very similar to the use of the shadow puppets in Candyman 2021.
yes.
Nice.
Like it did the same thing for me. Like I found it was very like it was how to make this intense violence, this intense like craziness a little easier to swallow. Because a little doll of a little cute little stop animation doll with like a sinister face is a lot like easier to swallow than, I don't know, a fully grown man with an axe. Right?
That's true.
And especially like towards the end of the segment when it's like all the dolls, or sorry, no, I called them dolls, all the people from the painting kind of like are crowding around the man. Like could you imagine that if that was people? Like that'd be a lot more terrifying.
I think that this was and remains the scariest story in the anthology for me.
Absolutely.
Like as a kid, it would give me nightmares. I think the first time I tried to watch it, I think that was where I actually turned it off. Like when the doll tripped him up and they ran the footage back and so you could see him. Because something about the man getting busy with the fiddle, violin, whatever that was, the lighting, the way that the doll looks, it scared me like really, really bad and it just stayed with me. And it's so funny how you mentioned Candyman 2021 because I think that this has some inlays with that as well with because this is another piece where we're talking about black people being commemorated in art. Like we see that in the first story, but we also see that here. And that's something that they touch on with Candyman 2021 where Anthony is literally an artist who is commemorating the black experience through his artwork.
Yeah, and then it reminds me of the scene with the art dealer in that one too, where he was just like not interested until he was just like, oh, okay, racism, let's go.
Yeah, I didn't think about that. You're right. And that's typical, right? It's like people only care about it for as much as they can fit it into their understanding of it, or unless there's like a hype beast around it. Because I think I can't remember her name, but the one that ended up getting killed in that amazing shot from across the parking lot. She didn't care about it until the news was covering it. So then she's like trying to jump onto it. But I don't want to get caught on Candyman because we could go there. I know we could, but I thought that was an interesting inlay.
Oh no, completely. And it's like I loved your point there about it, like that people aren't caring about it as much as they can fit it into their own narrative or into their own experience. And it's just like, that's not what that's there for. That's there to open you up to new experiences. That's the whole point of it, not for you to shoehorn, like put a, square peg in a circular hole for yourself, like build yourself a circular hole.
I think it's because like if they can put it down like that, like into a little, and you see it talked about there as well, like into a little box of understanding, then they can ship it to other white people, and so then they can monetize it and make more money out of it. And sometimes that's where you see like culture vulturing happening, or like black people's like work being commodified by people who are not black, or whatever the case may be. Like that happens so often, and it's really scary, but it's a reality.
Yeah.
And this whole section ends with probably one of the most powerful allegories I think I've seen in a film. So one by one, these dolls that are in a painting have started to pop out of the painting, and we never see them literally pop out, but they disappear from the painting and become dolls in real life and start chasing him around this mansion, this antebellum mansion. And Duke covers himself. He falls down and tries to cover himself with an American flag, which the symbolism behind that, like a white male in power trying to save himself by covering himself up with American flag, is just heavy, y'all. That is again, still relevant, still very prescient use of imagery. And then the little dolls attacking him, all I could think of was like being eaten alive by piranhas and like death by 1,000 cuts, like little itty bitty nibbles. And I was like, huh? Like, can you imagine? It was like a bunch of teeny tiny cuts. I would 100% rather be like decapitated or stabbed right in the heart or something, but he dies this like awful slow death. This is something that we could really get into, but I think it's very interesting to watch a man get cannibalized by former slaves when, unfortunately, during slavery in America, there were 100% Black enslaved people getting cannibalized by white people in America. And it's a very fucked up part of our history. And that could be its whole other own episode, like you said, Brian. This is such a heavy segment, but again, it's probably my favorite segment of the whole movie.
Question for you guys.
Mhm.
Do you think 45, when he was picking out his toupee, was like, give me the Duke?
Not the dude. I don't
And
think
yes.
yeah.
Do you
I
think
don't
he
know.
was like, hello, toupee master? I would like the Duke.
Not toupee master.
I don't know the term.
I don't know either. That just took me out. That man needed a lace front and some heavy glue because whatever he had going on was not working.
Just the
Yeah.
thought, because the parallels.
I
too
know.
strong.
Oh, also in this segment, we get both of Rusty's parents. His dad plays the minister at the funeral for Rhodey, and then Ryan, you pointed out.
Yeah, that Miss Cobbs is actually his mom, but I didn't know that his father was in it too until you just said that. That's crazy. Oh,
Right.
I love that. I love that.
I know. He was like, look, I'm going to make a really bloody movie. Do you want to be in it? 'Cause my parents don't watch anything I'm in. Well, I take that back. They watched one episode of a murder show I was in, and my mom was like, I can't watch you get murdered. And I'm like, well, my whole career is going to be a tough one for you. Like,
Oh,
it's
me
fine.
in horror movies, I didn't think about that, and that's an honor, like for people to be killed in a horror movie. So I mean, like, look at Drew Barrymore. Like, she was literally immortalized, and she got slayed in like less than 30 seconds.
I know, Jesus. So then we go from this, like, slightly more lighthearted section to the last piece of this anthology called Hardcore Convert. And this one has some it has actual footage of lynchings and Black people being killed in this country. And I think as a teenager, it was really important for me as a white woman to see that. It was gory. Yes. It was realistic because it was real. Yes. But I'm glad that I saw it when I did, because it just reminds me of that quote that's like, and I saw this on Instagram, a blogger I follow, she's Black, and she was saying, if my little Black son is old enough to get spoken to about, the dangers of being a little Black boy in America, then your little white child is old enough to be spoken to about racism. This one in particular, Ryan, I'm interested to hear your thoughts, because I don't feel 100% qualified nor comfortable talking about some of the themes in it, again, because I am a white woman. And the theming of this is Jerome, the gang member who goes by Crazy K, shooting his rival, Lil Deke. He ends up in jail, and it kind of all goes sideways from there. And there was a lighthearted part where they show him like doing sit-ups in his prison cell, and all I could think of was the 50 Cent video where he's like doing sit-ups on the bar. Y'all know what I'm talking about, where he's like running on the treadmill.
Yeah.
Is it in the club? Is it that one? I think it is.
It is.
Yeah. No. I mean, I hate that he's, super problematic, but that was classic video for my teenage years. But he's in his jail cell, and he gets brought out by a doctor who's played by an iconic actress. And they straight up Clockwork Orange him with these visuals.
Yeah. And the set for that as well gave me Luke Cage meets Captain America meets Rocky Horror vibes, because it was just like the Luke Cage aspect, like he's in prison, gets chosen for, this experimental procedure. Captain America, because of the way they set it up, like, like we're gonna, strap you in, blah, 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 get you prepared, like medical process. And then the Rocky Horror was like the set literally looked like they took the Rocky Horror lab set and then just made it look rusty and prison-esque and like in a sewer type situation. And the women, instead of go-go dancer looking,
their outfits were iconic.
Science lab ladies.
Yeah. I would wear those dresses and those boots.
Yeah, that 60s look just works. Like, for me, it always does. Like, I understand why Ariana Grande is obsessed with it, but to be honest,
same.
It was one of the reasons I was excited to see Last Night in Soho as well, because I actually really like that style, like that is 60s style.
We will talk about this off pod. I have feelings.
Yeah. What you said? Say it one more time.
We will talk about this off pod, off mic, because I have feelings.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna bring out my white leather look for you guys exclusively. Yes. No, but
bring them go boots or go home.
Yep.
That's what I'm saying. The higher the boots, the higher from hell.
The higher the boots, the higher the pony.
Oh my God. The higher the boots, the lower my credit. So, because I can't afford that shit.
Who can?
I think this story in particular, though, it was probably because there are themes in each story up until this point that I feel remind Black people that, we still have to be aware and we have to contribute to our communities in particular ways. But it feels like this is the first story that is just 100%. And this is, I mean, I don't know if the filmmaker's goal was for this, but for me, I was interpreting it as them saying this is for the Black community to kind of like focus on why it's important for us not to tear each other down, and we need to focus more so on building each other up. Because Jerome, who's played by Lamont Bentley, who was famously Hakeem in Moesha and the Parkers, this is another person like David Alec Greer who I feel like had more comedic roles. Like when Hakeem would come over and stuff, they'd always treat him like Roger on Sister Sister and tell him he has to go home. But in this, it's more serious and it's stark, and he represents the Black man who is essentially killing other Black men. And he has this instance where he meets a white man in the cell over who is a white supremacist, and basically tells him candidly like he wants to eradicate all Black people. And obviously Lamont's character would be very upset with this and goes back and forth with him, but he's contributing to that. And there are so many ways, I think, especially in the 90s, that there was this concern around, Black on, I don't like to say Black on Black crime. And I'm explaining to you why, because I feel like sometimes it's put in the wrong perspective. It's used as like a counter argument, like,
Yes.
oh, well, because Black on Black crime. So I don't mean it so much from that perspective, but I do mean it from the sense of if there are people watching, it's this wake up call of why you shouldn't be the person who makes your career built off of selling drugs in the Black community where it's destroying the Black community, for example, or you shouldn't be involved in certain types of violence. And this is something that I don't feel the most comfortable touching on since I'm not a part of that life. And I understand that it's like a touchy thing, and I haven't shared this anywhere, but I'll share it here just because I feel comfortable talking on it a little bit. Like, my older brother was involved in gang violence. He was a Crip for many years. He was involved with like a drive-by shooting that made us have to relocate from New Mexico. And he's paralyzed now. I really don't talk about this, like, because he was shot multiple times after having gone up to Baltimore and getting involved with things that he wasn't supposed to be involved with. And when you see him and other men in my family like him, you probably wouldn't even believe that we were all related, because like I'm not like the guys in my family like at all. Like they grew up in that life and that's what they were attracted to. So this story hits me at a different angle because I have seen my cousins die. One of my cousin is serving life right now because he killed 3 people. There's a lot of stuff, that I in this story see from having grown up, lifting a pillow in my house and there was a gun in the couch. Like, it's a triggering story. It really is. And it's the cries that I, as a child, would have verbalized if I could have, that we shouldn't tear each other down. We shouldn't be involved in all this stuff. We need to like build one another up. And I try to live out of that space where I'm in now. I try my best to support people in my community. I mean, not just my community, but I'm just in the context of this. Like, I try to support people in my community best way I can. I try not to tear down others. And I just really like that the filmmakers use this platform in this space to make that type of commentary around that time where gang violence was at an all-time high. And I think there is so many examples in this film as a whole where we see how the white, I don't want to say agenda because that doesn't, I don't know if that's accurate, but like how white people can contribute to that type of environment. Like where you see in one of the earlier stories how the cop does plant drugs on somebody. This does happen, like Jamie was saying earlier, like that is a serious thing. And so as a result of people going to jail for things that they did not do, or for minor weed charges, which later get thrown out because now weed is more so societally accepted, but that's a different story. The damage has been done. So a lot of these people are convicts and they don't have a chance to really get assimilated back into the workforce, or they struggle. And so as a result, they end up resorting to means that might end them up in gangs or back in jail or dead. Like, it's a cycle. And it's easy and that's why I don't, like I said, I don't like saying certain things to be judgmental of people who are in that life too much beyond my own experience, because it could be me. Like, I could be driving down the street tomorrow and then something can happen that will land me in jail, despite the fact that I didn't do anything. And because I am a Black man in America, that's the last bit. Like, I can come out of that even after being exonerated, not being able to have my record expunged, and the next thing you know, I can't secure a career. I can't do certain things. And that's just something that a lot of people who are not black don't really have to deal with because the systemic racism in America. So I know I said a lot just now, but
No,
that's what
no.
I got from it.
No, we want you to talk about it.
Yeah, listen, and I was so excited when you could come on for this because I know you and I have had some pretty heavy conversations, just person to person. And, this stuff, again, I hate that there even has to be a mention of quote unquote black on black crime because that's bullshit, because almost all crime statistically is done against someone of their own race. Mm-hmm. And on top of that, like, regardless of what you are, black, white, brown, yellow, whatever. And what kills me is that has become this dog whistle for people to say, well, what about the black people that kill other black people? When someone protests white person or a black person or anyone being killed now. And the visuals that they use in this, like you were saying, he gets put in this prison right next to a white supremacist, of which there are plenty in prison. And he says, the white supremacist says, well, how many people that you killed were black? Mm-hmm. And that was kind of a wake-up call for Jerome. And again, it's another reason why I wanted to have you on, because Bhavna and I don't have a place to talk about, this at a serious level.
No, this is why we wanted you to come and talk about this. And we wanted Robin in our last episode for Get Out to come and talk about it as well, because we aren't qualified to talk about this, but we know that these things need to be talked about, and we're not the ones to talk about them.
Well, and it's, I was super lucky and I got to go to school at the University of Alabama, just like my dad did. And obviously the university has a very complicated history. We are very famous for Ruby Bridges and people protesting her getting integrated into a white school. And she didn't come to Alabama, but just it happened in our state. And luckily, when I was there, I got to take a class called The History of Civil Rights. And my professor, God bless him, he made us look at what the media was at the time of Emmett Till's murder. The famous picture of him in his open casket and his mom saying, I don't ever want to see him this way, but America needs to see him in his open casket to see what happens when racism is allowed to run rampant. And we saw pictures of real lynchings, and those exact images get used in this short where, she calls it exposure therapy, when they strap him into the chair and throw him into the chair. And he's also dressed like an enslaved person would be dressed to be sold for auction, which I thought was very interesting.
Nice catch.
I was like, whoa, that is heavy. Not heavy-handed, just heavy, mentally.
Yeah.
He gets spun around in that chair while this viewfinder is over his eyes, and he's having to watch this montage of lynchings and racial beatings and these various things from the 1700s to 1995. And again, having watched this movie shortly after having taken that class, it impacted me a lot more than it did because I didn't see that section as a child. But knowing this is real, these are real people, and it was very visceral. I guess that's the word I'm looking for. And also, if you guys ever get a chance to go to the National African American History Museum in DC, A, I bring tissues. B, there's a Emmett Till memorial, and they have his casket in there. I'm losing my words because it was such an emotionally impactful thing to see that. And I think, to your point, Ryan, this applies to not just Black America, but it's for Black America. I think it can apply to anyone of any group, like, why are there women that tear other women down? Why are there, it can apply to almost any group, but it's more applicable at the moment to Black America. And that I don't feel any sort of qualified to talk on it past this point. So I'm always very interested in your thoughts on it, especially knowing your family,
I feel like I love what y'all all are saying. And I feel like the reality is, like you said, it is like that wake up call. Like, it's not just for Black America, but like this was, I think, like a piece that was for us by us for sure. Like he was trying to wake us up and just like see certain things, and a lot of that was just like spot on. Like he laid in and just said what needed to be said. I even quoted, I know you guys saw it put in the notes, like, when it says Cain was the world's first murderer, he killed his own brother. Like, that's so deep. And where I grew up, like, my father so he was a JAG officer, a lawyer, and all that, and so he got to see that side of things. You know what I mean? Like he was able to go into predominantly white spaces and see certain things, and would kind of shield us the best that he could, but also try to prepare us for certain things. And I didn't see it obviously until I got older. And he also studied Africana, and he met some amazing people. Like he met Coretta Scott King, and he met James Baldwin, and he's just a well-read and a well-studied man. And I grew up just wanting to be just like him. Like
I'm
after
losing
watching
my
you
shit
guys,
at him
like
meeting James
showing y'all.
Baldwin. I'm like,
But
what?
can I tell y'all funny? So he's gonna kill me for sharing
Yes.
this, but I don't care. So like he's gonna murder me. So he didn't know James Baldwin was gay, and like
Oh,
did not know. So one day we're talking, and like if you've seen my book collection before, Jamie, I
Yes.
have those James Baldwins. He got them for me. Keep this in mind. So one day we're talking, and I'm like, and I'm getting a vibe, and I'm like, did you know James Baldwin was gay? And he's like, what? I'm like, yeah. And he was like, oh, no, I guess I never thought about it. I didn't know. And it was just, it was so funny. But I have to tell that.
Why did you think France was such a great draw for him?
Listen.
I don't think he read all his books. I think maybe he read enough where he didn't get to see that side or something. I don't know. But the point is, because I'll get sidetracked real easily. Y'all know me. I can talk.
Listen, If Beale Street Could Talk is one of my all-time favorite books.
Wait, say it again. I'm sorry.
If Beale Street Could Talk.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's good that you brought that, because he, the quote about Cain, like the idea of not being our brother's keeper, but we are. And that's why kind of society is what it is now, is because we don't have any collectivism. Like we don't have any idea of like taking care of each other outside of situations where usually the inhabitants of the neighborhood are lower income.
Yeah, and just again to touch upon, I'm not making this about Indian people, guys, I swear to God, but I'm just talking from my own experience.
It that way.
But that's just honestly, that's how the community works here. Like, because it's still largely an immigrant-based community. Like even this many years down the road, like my mom's family came over in the 60s, and then my dad came over in the 80s when he married my mom, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But like this is still holds true today to 2021. It's like if you have a relation to somebody, whether they're a family friend or they're like a second or third or fourth cousin or something like that in India, and like, they're coming over to Canada for their PR permanent residency. I was like, the term is different for Americans. PR is permanent residency. It's the first step before citizenship. Yeah. You have to reach PR first. But you're like, okay, go stay with so and so. They're going to take care of you. Because then it's like, and then like, so I remember as a kid that was pretty jarring for me personally, because it was just like, my parents' cousins' kids would be coming to stay with us for, a month or two to establish residency. And I'd be like, well, why? I don't even know who the hell these people are. Like, I don't know these people. Why are they coming to stay at my house? Like, because I was a kid very much brought up in the West. Like, so I was just like, why are these people coming to stay at my house? It's like, no, but we look after each other. We look after our people. Like, there's no explanation. Like, even if you don't know these people, because the odds are my parents didn't even know these people because they were like so far removed from the relation that it's just like, oh, hey, I know so-and-so in Canada, we're going to look after them. And you do look after them. Like, you do look after each other. Like there's actually a term, it's a Punjabi term, but it's also, it's like a North Indian term. We're just going to use it blanket. It's called apne bande, which means like, our man or like our person. So if you hear Indian people say that, it's like, we found we found somebody to help us out. And so it's a big part of like the South Asian culture. Wow. In the Western diaspora, is that like, okay, I found an Indian person, they're going to help me out. So like the sense of community. So to touch upon this segment where it's like, we got to look out for each other. We got to, reestablish community. We got to reestablish us looking out for each other, really kind of hit home for me in a different kind of way, where it's just like, that's how we've kind of always been, to our own detriment sometimes. Yeah. Even like, cause it's just blind looking out for each other. So it's almost like the other end of the spectrum. Where it's like we do it regardless of our own personal boundaries, regardless of our own personal situations. Like we may be broke as shit, but we still gotta look out for our guests, look out for our people. So like it kind of made me go like, how do I explain it? It's like, sorry, now I'm losing my words. My holding on to the brain cells fading, but it's more like I've seen it from the opposite end of the spectrum, where it's like, it's almost just as detrimental, maybe not on the crime front, maybe definitely not on the imprisonment front and all of the stuff that comes with that. But it's more on the other end of like I've seen people be financially ruined because they've had to look out for one another. So it's like, We got to find a happy medium, folks.
Yeah.
So there's
We still got to look out for each other.
Yeah. So there's the idea of collectivism, which is us all assisting each other. But then what you're talking about, Bhavna, is more tribalism, like hive thing.
Yes.
Yeah. So, and I hate that we can have a whole conversation about why the word tribal is applied negatively here. That's a whole other conversation. Yeah. But tribalism, groupthink versus collectivism. And I think that that's what this last story touches on, is the idea of the gang versus the family. And I think that that can also apply to, I mean,
You're just giving it to me. I'm sorry. Y'all giving me more life than y'all know. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Listen, Ryan is my hype man. I love him so much. I just, and also the fact that like Black organized crime gets turned into a monster, whereas Italian group crime gets turned into an award-winning television show. And I still listen, I'm a Sopranos stan. You will not hear anything from me.
I haven't seen it. So I don't,
it's not for everybody, but I just find it so interesting that especially at the time that this movie came out, there were the East Coast, West Coast battles. And then at the same time, there were movies shortly before this, like Goodfellas, that glamorized organized crime within a predominantly white community. And Italians were not always seen as white, which is a whole other conversation, especially Jewish Italians. Ryan had such a good point in his notes, and this blew me away about the bullets. Oh my God.
Yeah, like the idea the bullets don't have names on them. Like that's something that I heard a lot growing up, especially in my house. They just warned me about hanging out in certain areas or running with certain groups of people because of this idea that, bullets don't have names on them. And we all know, like, I mean, maybe a month before this recording, there was actually a situation similar to what they were talking about in this movie, where there was a kid in the living room. He was like 8 years old. And I'm talking about in my area. And for everyone listening, I live like in Maryland, like 45 minutes outside of DC. But he was just in his living room, and like a bullet came into the living room and just killed him. And it was because of people shooting on the street. It's really sad because I think that we sometimes imagine that we can be so safe, we can move in this way and that way, and these things won't happen to us. When in reality, we need to start at home and just not engage in gun violence, maybe even find out a way to get better gun reform laws. And even I think in terms of the people who are being hurt enough or broken enough to try to find family or solace in the gang environment, figuring out how to penetrate that, because bullets don't have names on them. So it's like if people are on the street and they're shooting, like anyone can get hurt. And 9 times out of 10, it's like a car accident. It's rarely going to be the person responsible. It's going to be a random innocent bystander or somebody who has nothing to do with the situation. And they just hit all the things, and like I said, like growing up, like my parents would talk to me about stuff like this. Like my father would tell me the Cain and Abel story all the time as like a metaphor to help me understand, brotherhood. And, he would talk to me about bullets not having names on them. And wow, this movie, you guys.
It's incredible. It really is. And it's so underrated. And sorry, Bhavna, what were you going to say?
Oh, no, go ahead.
It's so underrated. And I think a big piece of that was the marketing and also the time frame that it came out in. And again, Ryan, I completely agree. Like, it's picking up steam, y'all, as like a cult classic. And I hate that it has to even be phrased that way, like we said. But the final scene of this movie is the most iconic and my favorite besides the KKK comeuppance. So we get Mr. Sims, and he opens the final set of caskets, and he's like, "Oh, this is where the shit is."
Sorry, every time, guys. Every time it says the shit, take a shot.
So he opens the caskets, and as he's like we said at the beginning, the way they frame the through line of this anthology is that as they open a casket in a funeral home, he tells the story of the dead body in the casket. But these final 3 caskets have the bodies of the 3 guys that have come to get their stash of drugs. And he is like, "This ain't no funeral home." And when he says, "Welcome to hell, motherfuckers," I die every time because it's so iconic, and he does it in such a good, part comedic, part scary way. And I just truly feel like this movie is the blueprint. I love it so much.
I would agree it is the blueprint. And for some reason, I just couldn't place it. That outer story reveal felt so familiar.
Doesn't it look super familiar, y'all? I just feel like maybe there were some recent copycats. I don't know.
But that's the thing though, is that this format is great and it can be repurposed for different horror movies, and it has been, but in a way that isn't like that familiar feeling, like I've mentioned it before on this pod, that one of my favorite Hindi horror movies has a very similar format to this. Not exactly the same at all. Like it's not like you do have a Mr. Sims-esque character, but it's not Mr. Sims like at all. Like it's more like it's more like your guide, your storyteller, your person you find in the woods in this case. And the movie's called Darna Manahe. I don't remember the year it came out, but like it's essentially like these kids are lost in the woods. And they stumble upon this house. It's like house in the middle of the woods. And it's this old lady that's like, oh, I'll give you shelter. Like, here, come around. I'll tell you stories. Like, and these kids are like little shitheads being like, I'm not going to be scared.
I know.
Please watch it. It was on Netflix at some point. You can probably find it somewhere. It's really fucking great.
What's the name again?
Darna Manahe. It means being scared is not allowed. Like, you're not allowed to be scared. Because that's the point of the thing, is that you're not supposed to be scared. Like these kids are like getting told these stories. And actually it was a big deal at the time in Indian cinema because you had major blockbuster stars in the little vignettes. Yeah, you had them. Like some of the biggest stars like you could think of like in Indian cinema were in these things. So I remember being like, because the kids are all played by not nobodies, but like, unknown actors. Like even the woman that's like the old woman is an unknown-ish actress, like stuff like that. But all the people in the vignettes are super famous, and it's super scary. So it's not necessarily like the morality tale like in Tales from the Hood, or like there's not a lot of political messages, or not even just political, but like common sense messages that were like being sent out. It is more horror based, but the point is you can copy the format of like we don't know, we're in this situation, here are some stories, without completely just ripping it off like certain movies that we've all seen.
Listen, all shade, all tea, all offense. I am going to keep my closing thoughts short, and then I'll pass it to Bhavna, and then Ryan, you're going to close us out as our esteemed guest. First of all, I'm dying at the juxtaposition of the end of that of Extreme Convert, bringing us into the fact that the big reveal is that the guy that dies in Extreme Convert was actually killed by the 3 young men who are taking a tour of this funeral home, trying to find their drug stash. And that's how it like loops it all in. I'm going to try to keep this super short, y'all, I promise. My final thoughts are that this movie, like I said, A, is such a blueprint for other anthologies coming out. B, it suffered from movie execs not knowing how to market this because they kept slapping that famous word urban on it. I vividly remember the like little cardboard cutout stand thing at Blockbuster, when you could also buy and rent at Blockbuster, having that iconic flaming skull with the sunglasses on it, and it being clearly supposed to be like a joke almost, which really just is how so many pieces of black art get handled in this country. And lastly, I'm super thankful that this was made, because I just think if you show this to like a group of teenage boys now, it's the same teenage boys that watch, Fight Club, and they think that Tyler Durden is the hero kind of thing. Like, I feel like we could show this to those same teenage boys now. A, it would still be relevant, and B, I just feel like it would be just as impactful. Like, I think this was just such an important movie to get made, and y'all know I love pretty much every actor involved in this. And I just think it's such an iconic movie. And the fact that it has a 52% on Rotten Tomatoes is a travesty. The second and third ones have higher percentages, which I don't think I agree with, because this movie for me was like a 9.5 out of 10, to be honest. Like, I think that's my closing thought, you guys.
Nice.
my closing thoughts are just that this was a wild ride for me to have had such distance between my viewings, like from, basically being a little kid,
Mhm.
because I was, what, 8 years old or so when this movie came out. So I watched it when I was like 9, because, back then you had to wait a year before the Blockbuster had your VHS, for anyone that remembers those days. Hold on, let me get my walker out. Uh, but it was such a wild ride because, like, in between then and now, like, my horror taste has been shaped and reshaped and refined and all that stuff in between. And then now to watch it, especially given like today's climate, like, and how it really hasn't changed, it's almost just like you could have told me like this film was just like an indie film student production even from like this year, and I would have believed you. Like, if they were like studying the craft of, like, let's just say cinematography of the 90s, like if that would be the only thing that would have taken me out of that experience, would have been like, if you told me this was made fairly recently, I'd be like, all right, cool. Like, not cool, but like, like, okay, I can roll with that. Like, I see it. And that's really sad. Um, like, I feel like I know, like, that's not really like the apt word to say, but it's just as amazing as this movie is, it's also heartbreaking to watch it with that much distance, to know that like the world really hasn't changed at all. It's just there's more proof of it.
Yeah, it's really sad that that's the tea. So I also have to give it, like, I mean, because this is an anthology that touches on, police brutality on Black men, which is a big problem then, a big problem now. They're still talking about like gang violence and, you know, other issues that are still relevant to date. It's definitely 10 out of 10 for me. And I feel that it's difficult for them to kind of create the same magic in the sequels, not because the sequels have a lack of things to draw from, but unfortunately, a lot of these issues still haven't been resolved. Like, these are things that are still going on. I had two other notes that I wanted to slide in somewhere, so I figured
Do it.
now's a good time. Did it not look like to you guys they were Harlem shaking in the Hell Flame?
Yes.
It was giving me that so strong, and I was like, I feel
It's the
so bad.
shoulders.
Yes, and I'm like, and then I was like, you know what? I know I'm supposed to be scared, but it's it's giving me Harlem shaking in hell. And
Stop.
the other thing I
Can't.
forgot to touch on, but I feel like is really relevant in these stories, is this thing that my parents used to tell me growing up, which is when you kill somebody, like their spirit stays with you. That's something that my parents always told me growing up. And I don't know if that's like a black thing or like just like my parents were just on one, but it just they do that in this last one where he's down in that chamber and like the spirits of all the people he killed are right there in front of him. And it's kind of like if, and this is something they said in Darkly, and I'll leave it at this, and that's the end of my notes, right? If what it takes for a haunting to happen is for a body to be killed like in a rage state, and so then they're haunting a particular space, then it really puts into question what America essentially is, you know where so many people of color, whether they were Native Americans or slaves coming over, and we have so many of our graves upturned or not marked with headstones. It's like America's a big old haunted house, and it's really scary to think about. But that's why I'm happy that pieces like Tales from the Hood exist, because it's finally giving us a chance to see, because there are moments that are comedic, but then there's also points that are, I think, really cool. We get to see vengeance. Like the black bodies may be dispatched, but the spirit is still alive. And that spirit is taking out vengeance and doing things. And it's iconic. We get to see some black survivors. We get to see people use powers who are black. This is all in one movie that's like Jamie and Sheree always ask for the perfect 90-minute window. Like, what is everyone else's excuse at this point, right?
This movie
Right?
is 98 minutes and it is perfect. Like listen, I cannot agree with you more. Also, I can't with your Harlem Shake reference because now I need that. I need someone to edit that scene with the like actual song. Well, Ryan, where can the people find you?
So you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Brother Ghoulish. I'm also on Facebook, but I mean, I'm not really over there. Or Meta, sorry. So you can find me there. You can also find my podcast, Brother Ghoulish's Tomb or Brother Ghoulish's Dracula Breakdown, if that's your thing, wherever podcasts are played. And if you want to meet me in person, I'm likely haunting an underpass near you. So keep a lookout.
Iconic. I can't. Yeah, well, you can find us at Bloody Broads Pod on Twitter and Instagram. We are at bloodybroadspod@gmail.com for thoughts. Leave us a review wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you didn't like this episode, put it in a 5-star review.
Yeah.
We will talk to you guys in 2 weeks. Bye.